People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. 15 years after the conclusion of Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict, questions remain with respect to the effective implementation of transitional justice mechanisms. What progress has been made thus far? What more remains to be done? How relevant is the prioritization of human rights in enabling a democratic, inclusive and justice-based ecosystem? My guest tonight is Amnesty International's Secretary General, Agnès Callamard, who is in Sri Lanka on a short visit and joins me now at the Newsfirst studio. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Peace building, reconciliation, truth telling, the right to memorialization, transitional justice pillars in general cannot exist in a vacuum. They require political will, they require trust, they need to be survivor-centric and consultative. During your visit in Sri Lanka, you met with several diverse stakeholders, from the head of state to the mothers of the disappeared in the north to civil society. Speak to us about what some of your initial observations were.
Thank you very much. My first observation must be in relation to the mothers of the disappeared. It was very emotional, gut-wrenching testimonies that I received from those mothers. They came to me with photos, they came to me with documentations, they came to me with questions, they came to me with fears, anger, and mistrust. Many of them have been engaging with state mechanism and institutions from the moment these have been made available. I've met some mothers who have given their testimonies about their loved ones more than 10 times, but nothing has been done. I've met mothers who have told me about the repeated harassment still to these days, intimidation and surveillance that they are encountering in their attempt to search for truth and justice. I've met mothers who have cried, talking about the last moment that they saw their families before they surrendered. I want to say that one of the dimension of this, every war is absolutely horrific. One particular dimension of the conflict, the last days of the conflict that I find very upsetting, is the fact that on those last days, people came to surrender. Some of them were LTTE cadres and soldiers. Others were their families. Some as young as a few months old, 3 years old, 5 years old, wife, mothers. And these have been disappeared alongside the LTTE male soldiers. I think it is a very legitimate question that mothers are asking. Where are my children? Where is this baby that was taken away? Where are those kids, 3 months old, 2 years old? The fact that they were surrendering to the victors, to the Sri Lankan army, testified to their willingness to become non-combatant. And some of them were initially, in any case, non-combatants. They were family members, some of them as young as 3 or 4 months old. 15 years on, they are still disappeared. That is really unacceptable. And you were speaking in your introduction of what progresses have been made. As far as truth and justice are concerned, very little. In fact, close to nothing. There has been no cases really that has been brought to fruition. A couple of individuals have been identified, but nothing much more than that has happened. I've mentioned mothers who have gone to testify, some as often as 14 times, but nothing has been done in terms of meaningful investigation and adjudication of their cases. So the disappeared remain disappeared. Justice for those that were extrajudicially killed has not been delivered. And there is a poignant sense of deep loss within that community, within the mothers' community. And what is very striking to me is how trust has been completely lost. There is no trust left for the institution of the state. And that's very serious. That's very grave, I will say. Because you cannot build truth, reconciliation. In fact, you cannot build a future where there is no trust left between the people and the authorities. So if I were to say, to use one word to describe my visit, it will be the deep sense of mistrust that I have witnessed with the communities in the north and the east of the country. And I believe that this is a mistrust that can also be found elsewhere. A mistrust for the political leadership of Sri Lanka.
Thank you for your initial observations. You also met with the President of Sri Lanka. Yeah. Did you express your concerns?
We absolutely did. We had an engaged conversation. I very much welcome his engagement with those issues. I welcome his commitment to truth and reconciliation. He himself is spearheading this new instrument on truth and reconciliation. But we've also highlighted to him all the concern that we have with the fact that there is now a new initiative related to truth and reconciliation where nothing has happened with the old ones, and the Office of the Missing Person is still not delivering investigation. The Office for Reparation has not delivered a lot of reparation. There is a blatant failure on the part of those institutions that have been established over the last 15 years to deliver what they were mandated to deliver. So to establish a new instrument without trying to ensure that the old ones are actually equipped to deliver what they were mandated to do is a recipe for failure. It will, and this is reflected in how the mothers and other stakeholders in the Tamil communities are reacting to those initiatives. They are left in great doubt. In fact, they are rejecting those new mechanisms, and it's a situation that is the responsibility of the government. They must be creating an enabling environment so that their mechanisms can deliver. And the enabling environment is not there. What do I mean? The continuing harassment, surveillance of mothers and of other stakeholders is creating huge anger and distrust. This has been reflected over the last few days in the harassment of women who wanted to produce and distribute the kanjin. Why? I mean, there is no way you could suggest that kanjin is a form of incitement to violence. It's not. It's a reflection of the last days, of the famine, of the hunger. There is no reason why women should be harassed for doing something such as distributing kanjin. The lack of an enabling environment is reflected in the use of anti-terrorism legislation such as the PTA, in ways that are extremely detrimental to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and so on and so forth. So the conditions are simply not met at the moment for those instruments to deliver truth and justice, and our most, urging to the government is build trust and create an environment that is enabling that trust to take place and enabling your instrument to be able to deliver. We talked about the Office of the Missing Person, for instance. We need some legislative reforms so that they can be made more independent, so that they can have the resources to deliver their work, which is not the case at the moment. So there are a number of steps that should be taken that do not require to create a new instrument, but must ensure that the existing ones are able to deliver.
When we speak about the concept of human rights and its universality, there is a problematic conception of human rights, which is that it is a Western concept.
Yeah.
This is then twisted for political gain, and we see a great polarization between governments on the one hand that claim to protect sovereignty, and on the other hand, human rights organizations that are deemed Western and therefore misplaced in their rhetoric. How do we bridge this gap?
Well, I actually believe that the so-called gap is an instrumentalization. Everyone who knows a little bit about human rights knows a few things. One, its sources are very old, very diverse, and are not the product of one region in particular.
Okay.
You will find human rights reference in every religious text. You will find human rights commitment in every culture. It is not something that is particularly Western to suggest that people should not be tortured and killed in an unlawful way. It is not particularly Western to suggest that people should and are born equal in rights. It is not particularly Western to claim that men and women are equal. It is something that people have articulated in many languages, in many cultures, people of many different races, different ethnicity, and so on and so forth. The formal text, the one that are part of the most recent incarnation of human rights, i.e. what came after the end of World War II, all of those instruments from 1948 onwards have not been the product of just championed, in fact, by Western governments. The drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was done by a range of actors, and some of whom were absolutely not from a Western background. That include the Lebanese representative, the Chinese representative, the Indian representative, to name a few. All of those instruments that came from the 1940s to now, such as the International Convention Against Racial Discrimination, the International Convention Against Violence Against Women, these were driven by leaders from global South countries. I will not even mention something much more recent. In fact, I will mention, which is right now, in the context of the current conflict opposing Israel to Hamas, we have South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, demanding from the International Court of Justice that it renders a ruling on the possible violations of the Genocide Convention by Israel. So to suggest that human rights were produced by a certain kind of people and only used by a certain kind of people is actually factually incorrect. This is why I'm suggesting that this is an easy rhetoric. It's it's a way of making cheap shot at range of actors and of undermining them, but it is not factually grounded and it is not helpful. It is not helpful because human rights is something that is bringing all of us together. And the main claim of human rights is that everyone, by virtue of being human, has the same rights as anyone else.
Absolutely. We see powerful actors on the world stage being silent in the face of atrocity, and silence during atrocity is complicity. I'd like your perspectives on this global double standard, given the fact that we speak of never repeating the atrocities of the Holocaust. We say never again and nunca más, but we are living through unspeakable horrors, and they are this time heavily documented, and we just look on through our digital screens and scroll. Why do you think it is that the foundational principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, inter alia, have not managed to salvage humanity's consciousness and non-recurrence of conflict?
I will not be as negative as you are in terms of humanity consciousness. I will be as negative as you are in terms of the world right now being close to an abyss. Why? Because those with the greatest power and influence are intentionally violating international law and claiming that those violations are justified, and by so doing emptying it out of any meaningful content. We are looking at Gaza and Israel. Israel, in response to the atrocity committed by Hamas, has itself committed a range of atrocities, including intentional starvation of the population and the deliberate targeting and shelling of civilians, among others. In response to the mounting evidence of violation of the Geneva Convention related to the law of war, in response to the mounting evidence of risk of genocide, indeed for some it's already genocide, the United States, one of the most powerful countries in the world, is failing to hold Israel to account, has continuously supported Israel, including through the transfer of weapons and by using its veto power at the Security Council, thus preventing a much needed ceasefire. So the United States, one of the leading economic, political powers in the world, is failing to uphold international law and the rule-based order. This is coming in 2023, 2024, immediately in the aftermath of Russia doing exactly the same with Ukraine. Russia is violating the UN Charter by committing an act of aggression against Ukraine, a form of colonialism, I will say, of Ukraine. And again, Russia is justifying its gross violation of international law in the name of its security or whatever else it is inventing. So we have here two of the main superpowers failing to uphold the rule of law and the rule-based order. I could speak about China, that is using its power to prevent scrutiny of what it's doing against the Uyghur population in China. This is the situation. Now, does that mean that the people of the world are forgetting about what's right, what's wrong? I don't think so, because we at Amnesty International have documented for the last few years an increasing number of protests around the world of people demanding rights for themselves and for others. The situation in Gaza has prompted millions of people around the world, including under very difficult situation, to demand a ceasefire. Those people are actually using international law, are using the Convention on Genocide, are referring to the rule-based order. So these are meaningful to people. People hold on to them because they know that they will be the primary victims of any further breakdown of the rule-based order, which will be a complete abyss, of which, we could very well fall into it. And right now what is holding us back are actually people in Sri Lanka and elsewhere that are saying, not in my name. And when we said never again in 1948, we meant never again. We meant never again for the Palestinians. We meant never again for the Jews and Israelis. We meant never again for the people of Myanmar. We meant never again for the many people of Sri Lanka. So never again, I think, is something that is meaningful to people.
Thank you for infusing that much-needed hopefulness. We see crackdowns on freedom of expression, protesters who dare to challenge the status quo of governments are arbitrarily detained, are arrested, even when they are merely exercising their right to freedom of expression, right to freedom of assembly. In such a backdrop, what can be done? What are the oversight mechanisms that can be used?
The first point I want to make is that what you are describing, which is a crackdown on freedom of expression, right to peaceful protest, peaceful assembly, has become a global phenomenon. We at Amnesty International have recorded everywhere in the world a crackdown on peaceful expression, whether it's through protest or on social media or elsewhere. So that's the first issue we need to acknowledge. The repression is coming because people are demanding those rights.
Yeah.
Okay, so let it be very clear, and are continuing to demanding those rights. The repression so far has not resulted into people giving up. If anything, it is resulting into people being more determined to take on the street and demand their rights. The mechanisms are there. The mechanisms are in people's determinations. They are in people's resilience. They are in civil society monitoring and denouncing on the basis of international law. The mechanisms are hopefully in the hands of an independent judiciary that is able to deliver justice when force has been used unlawfully and is prepared to hold police officers to account, or the state to account for their violations of domestic law and international law. It is with the media. The mechanisms are importantly with the media, who are on the front line. We've seen that during the protest in Sri Lanka, which we at Amnesty International have documented and monitored, but you, the journalist, and you here particularly on this platform channel, have done a tremendous work, being the witness and reporting to everywhere else in the world about what's happening. This is, in fact, why the media is also being targeted by those in power, and why press freedom is also coming under attack. Look at the role of journalists in Palestine right now, in Gaza, who have been documenting days in, days out, often at the expense of their own life, the exactions and the violations being committed. So the media is also a superbly important mechanism in that context. We have the mechanisms. What we need are for government to refrain from engaging in repression as a default position. And that is what we are witnessing a little bit too much around the world right now. Countries modeling each other's repression, becoming the biggest export from one country to the next. And that is something that we, the media, civil society, the people, must reject. And the best way to reject it is through international solidarity.
Okay.
It's through working for your country and your people and working for those next door.
We are in conversation with Secretary General of Amnesty International, Agnès Callamard. We're going for a short commercial break.
The People's Platform.
යාගේ මැසේජ් එකේ ඔබ මාසයක් හිටපු නැති එකේ අතර මොකක් හරි ගැළපිල්ලක් තියෙනවා ඊයේ. ඒක නිසා ඇත්ත කියහන්. උනේ මොකද්ද කියලා එකෙක් හරි දරගෙන ඉන්න එපා.
උඹ අර කෙල්ලගේ තාත්තට කතා කරන්න ඕනේ.
කතා කරලා
උඹේ නේ යගේ කතන්දරේ උගේ ඔලුවට දාන්න ඕනේ.
ආදරේ තරම් අද රාත්‍රියට ඉදියට
Sirasa Telethirayen.
We live in a world of progress, but what if progress isn't reaching everyone? Millions of Sri Lankans struggle without access to clean water, safe roads and bridges to a better life. But you have reached out. You have touched their lives. Thank you, Sri Lanka, for making Gammadda the most impactful rural development movement in our nation. Gammadda, for the people, by the people.
සිම්පත හරියට ලියාපදිංචි කරගෙන තියෙන්න ඕන. සමහරවිම දන්නෙත් නැහැනේ. මේ සිම්පත කොයි තරම් වැදගත්ද කියලා මේ දුරකථන පාවිච්චි කරන හැම දෙනාම දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා තමයි මම කියන්නේ.
මැයි වලින් පස්සේ ලොකු ගම් වතුර තත්ත්වයක් එන්න නියමිතයි කියලා. කාලකුණ විද්‍යාඥයින් අනතුරු අංගවන පසුබිමක ඔබ කොයි විදිහටද මේ අපේ තෙත්බිම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් දකින්නේ?
කොළඹ නගරයේ තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් 21%ක් තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් වැසි ජලයෙන් 39%ක් රඳවා ගන්න බව.
දැන් විලත් නගරයේ අර කටයුතු කරන කට්ටිය දැන් එනවා පරිපාලනය නගරයට. ඔතුමේ දන්නවා ඇති අපි ගත්තොත් අලවටුකොට එහෙම නැත්නම් කිඹුලවල ප්‍රදේශයේ අපිට තියෙනවා රැයට කෑම කඩ. ඉස්සර ඒක තිබ්බ කොහෙද? කොළඹ. දැන් ගොඩ දෙනෙක් ඒ පැත්තට එන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ට අර පොළ පාට ගතිය ඒ තියෙන බ්‍රීස් එක කියන්නේ එඟට දැනෙන වෙනස අනිවාර්යෙන් දැනෙනවා.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට.
People shouldn't be afraid of their government. Instead, governments should be afraid of their people.
NPP has is by design, and it's not only in Sri Lanka, even across out of Sri Lanka as well.
I had to go to my cabinet minister secretary to even to get a small thing passed.
That's a different question. The authorities are there. Why aren't you going in?
The integrity was compromised by the bribery commission.
The chairman of the party does not attend when you all sign a MOU with GLPRIS and Nalagodeva, which is quite important.
Who was trying to safeguard the robbers of central bank.
We know in Sri Lanka there are issues.
Inquiry was going on.
People wanted Gotabaya, right? People elected him.
But what we can see is that it has certainly stalled. There is no public record of what these cases were.
In particular, the things are very severe when President is also the Minister of Finance.
I will give you a post how it came about. It was not argued in the parliament. It was not even put to the cabinet. It was forced down the throat of the people of this country without an election.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back to the show. I'm in conversation with Secretary General of Amnesty International, Dr. Agnès Callamard. Dr. Callamard, the world over we see growing hyper-nationalism, authoritarianism, xenophobia, misinformation, disinformation, and AI being misused, which are threats to democracy and the rule of law. However, responses to curb the ill effects of all of these put together aren't expeditious enough. How do you view this paradigm?
Well, I will agree with you that we have to really accelerate our response to what's happening. Let me take artificial intelligence and anything related to the information technology environment. Amnesty International has documented repeatedly how this environment, those instrument mechanisms, this technology is powering repression. It is reflected in the use of cyber surveillance, for instance, which has become extremely global. It is reflected in the use of artificial intelligence that is discriminatory in its effect and indeed as well in its data collection. We have highlighted cases of people for instance, who are receiving social assistance through a semi-autonomous AI system that is discriminatory in its handling of their request, and for which appeal is very difficult because it's not a people-driven thing. It's a machine-driven process, so it's making it very difficult to determine who is responsible for the fact that I am not getting the money I should be getting every month. We have repeatedly at Amnesty denounced the use of technology in facial recognition, for instance, in broad manner without discrimination. That is also a violation of international law, violation of freedom of movement, violation of privacy right, and is being used in ways that can be extremely violent and lethal. For instance, currently, as has been reported in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, we know that Israel is using a form of AI-based system to identify target, scaling each of those targets in order to determine whether they are potentially terrorist. It is based on a data collection that is not accountable. No one can really be taken off that list. And there is no appeal because once you are on the list, it can, basically you can be killed. This artificial intelligence, we are particularly worried about the way it is being used in the military sector. At the moment, Amnesty has been campaigning, in fact, not just at the moment, for a number of years now, for an international treaty prohibiting autonomous weapon. By this, I mean weapon that will be able to kill on their own without any kind of human intervention. There are a number of countries that are appalled by this possibility. They are coming together, they are trying to create a new treaty against it. Sadly, some of the most powerful countries are not yet prepared to stop what they believe to be the future of warfare. Right. So the environment around information technology, around artificial intelligence, is indeed one that we must be extremely aware of. What does it mean? It means that we need to push for meaningful regulation. And so far, regulations have not been delivered. There is no international regulation or international regulatory framework for artificial intelligence, and no countries, with a few exceptions, have established meaningful regulation of artificial intelligence in any forms and shape, whether it's facial recognition, whether it's the use of metadata for problematic applications, whether it is around cyber surveillance. So at Amnesty International, we are campaigning, it's one of our key priority to campaign for the regulation of artificial intelligence and indeed the regulation of generative artificial intelligence, which is the next, what is coming up right now. So it's extremely important for governments around the world to accelerate their own knowledge of what's coming. They cannot leave that to the private sectors. And they must, within the parliament, within the political establishment, there must be people who understand the risk that this new technology can pose for people, for their rights, for countries, and take the appropriate regulatory measures.
All right. This is very much an election year for much of South Asia, for much of Europe, the UK, USA, and we see governments actively pandering to the emotions of voters without any political will perhaps to proceed to action. In such a backdrop, what is the role of organizations such as Amnesty International in ensuring that governments hold themselves to account?
Yeah. So 2024 will be the year where the greatest number of people will vote ever in human history. And that includes very large countries and smaller ones. And indeed, there are elections in Sri Lanka. The main conditions for free and fair election must be the ability of people to express themselves without censorship, at least without censorship that goes beyond what is acceptable under international law. So people should be able to express themselves. They should be able to peacefully assemble. They should be able to create political parties. They should be able to be part of political parties. They should be able to protest. They should be able to march. They should be able to do all those things that are indispensable to the working of free and fair election. That applies to Sri Lanka. We at Amnesty International have been very worried with what happened in over the last 2 or 3 years following the 2021-2022 protest. There is in place a legal framework that is not conducive to the respect for freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. We are worried with the use of the anti-terrorism legislation that is creating a huge chilling effect on people's ability to come together. Now, terrorism or anti-terrorism is something that is acceptable under international law. Countering any act of violence by armed groups or by state is absolutely lawful, but this must be done within a certain framework. It must be proportionate to what you are seeking to obtain. It should not impact on people's fundamental freedoms that are part and parcel of the way, in fact, you most effectively fight back against those that intend to create divisions within society. So all of those mechanisms are central to ensuring that 2024 is the year where people can express themselves without fears, can vote for the person of their choice, that people can run for election without discrimination wherever they are, that men and women are able to be elected, and so on and so forth. This is going to be a very important year for the world. And our capacity to protect the right of people to be citizen is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Just as you alluded, we've seen how laws are being weaponized against people and how this is used as a common tactic. Regionally also, we're seeing a lot of similarities in the manner in which laws are being misapplied to suppress dissenters within a legal framework. So we see this in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. It's as if there is almost a corrupt politician's playbook.
Yeah, we call it the authoritarian politician playbook, but yes. as I mentioned earlier, the biggest export right now of many authoritarian leaders around the world is their own authoritarianism that is being picked up and modeled, emulated by other leaders. There are some good models that could be taken. So looking at the sub-region, yes, there are problematic laws being adopted, but there are a few good things. So Bangladesh and Afghanistan have ratified the International Criminal Court statute. We invite governments in the sub-region, including Sri Lanka, in doing the same. You do not have to just pick the wrong thing. You could also pick what is a positive thing. So yes, laws are being exported. Bad laws are being exported around the world within the region, but we could also very much show that some of the bad legal frameworks put forward by the United States, the United Kingdom, or China are becoming very popular within many communities. In Sri Lanka, there are a couple of laws that could become or could be adopted. They are not yet adopted, and it is incumbent upon the political leadership of these countries, of Sri Lanka, to say no. So, for instance, the NGO law. There is an idea that NGOs need to be further regulated. Actually, everyone I spoke to, including lawyers, have told me in Sri Lanka there is already a legal framework for NGOs. They do not need to have an additional legal framework. Anything additional is not meant to regulate according to the law. It is meant to control, to censor, and to shrink. And such a law must be combated and rejected with everything and every force that we have. And I will hope that the Sri Lankan media can support us, because it will have effect on all actors in civil society, including media and its ability to protect press freedom. So Sri Lanka, the authorities have a choice. They can emulate what's positive around the legal framework in the world, or they can duplicate what has been part and parcel of the authoritarian playbook, but is not delivering anything substantive for the people. It doesn't lead to growth. It doesn't lead to more wealth. It does not lead to a safer world. It does not lead to a fairer world. It does not lead to people having access to greater economic opportunities. Nothing like that. It's only feeding corruption. And let's make no mistake. Those that intend to impose or adopt such laws are doing so for their own self-interest, not for the interest of the people or of the country.
Dr. Callamard, bringing back the conversation specifically to Sri Lanka, in your perspective, how must the Sri Lankan government respond to growing calls across the board for accountability, specifically from a transitional justice point of view, but also from a larger human rights, justice, democracy point of view, given that we are going in for elections, given that it is the people's rights, people's welfare, people's best interests that must be ensured?
I think you have provided the answer to my question. They must first and foremost listen to the people, to the people in the north, to the people in the south, to the people in the east. They must listen to the Tamil, to the Sinhalese, to the Muslims. They must work towards building solidarity across communities that historically may have been divided, certainly because of this terrible war. Our call to the political leadership, I will say, of Sri Lanka is to go beyond the schedule of elections to the extent possible. I know this is a very tough call to make to politicians, but the short-term approach to fundamental questions is absolutely detrimental to the people and to the country. There needs to be, at some level, a commitment that goes beyond the schedule of elections, a commitment that brings together the political elite and around which they are saying whoever is in power, those things must progress. It may progress with, maybe different inflection here and there, but it must progress. It cannot be left hostage of various political parties and politicians' deals. And transitional justice is one of them. It's absolutely fundamental that whoever is in power must commit not to create their own instrument, knowing that they are not going to deliver, but to ensure that the existing framework is meant and made to deliver for the people. So let me reiterate our call to build trust, to create an enabling environment so that people can trust their institutions, to get rid of those laws that are an impediment to building trust and to allowing for the freedom of expression and peaceful assembly that are so essential to the delivery of truth and justice. We need to see the investigation into past violations during the war, into disappearance, and into current violations committed by government officials. We need those investigations to deliver something tangible so that the people can trust those institutions. The world is right now and is continuing to enter a very, very difficult period. We are seeing the multiplication of armed conflict for the last about 5 years, including international armed conflict, which had disappeared. We are seeing China, Russia, the United States fighting for hegemony, and that has great impact on trade and on the economy. We know about climate change and how much hardship it's going to provoke and is currently provoking for people. How many people are going to lose their life because of our inability to respond effectively as a global community to climate change. You have mentioned artificial intelligence that is going to run amok on societies. That is the world within which Sri Lanka is going to operate, like every other countries. How to be strong, how to create a future for the people of Sri Lanka if there is division, if there is distrust, if there is impunity, if there is continuing violations. That is not how you're going to confront the tough terrains ahead. So it is absolutely crucial for the present and the future of Sri Lanka that the political leadership create the conditions that will enable trust, justice, accountability to be delivered.
Dr. Agnès Callamard, thank you for this most insightful conversation. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you to you for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Good night.